Good evening and welcome to the Hawai'i Theater Center. It is Tuesday. I am Iggy Jang and you're tuning up for Tuning In with Dave and Jonathan. Take two. Iggy, how you doing?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Moss, and welcome to Tuning Up with Iggy and Dave. Nice to see you, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we are so happy to welcome tonight's special guest, a very good friend of mine, and associate professor of piano.
Full, believe it or not.
Wow, full professor of piano at the University of Hawaii. When did you get this new title?
A year ago, about a year ago.
Yeah, well, congratulations.
Thanks.
We missed the party.
Everybody
obviously.
makes mistakes,
yes,
but I'll take what I can get.
We're going to throw a huge party for you for this, just as soon as we can gather again.
Perfect.
So you are a piano professor.
That's right. Yeah.
So you're a pianist.
Yeah, I started playing piano when I was 4, and much to my parents' surprise, I've been able to make a career of it until I'm age 40 now. So we made it.
We made it, yeah, absolutely. So 4 years old, you began the piano. What was the first piece you played?
Oh, wow. I was a Suzuki kid about a year in, so I remember the Mississippi Hot Dogs and the Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars, but I think there must have been some good Alfred method books,
Excellent.
when we started early.
We actually were talking about the Suzuki method last week with Anna Womack as well. And Iggy, for our audience who's not familiar with Mississippi Hot Dog, can you solfege that for us?
Mississippi hot dog, 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 Mississippi hot.
Thank you, Iggy. Yes, so that is the twinkle variations that are kind of the foundation of the Suzuki method that all instruments now play.
That's right. So I think it actually works much better on strings than on piano because we're a 5-fingered bunch, and we suddenly have to go to the 6th finger very, very early on. So
how do you do Mississippi hot dog on the piano?
Oh, it's all about the wrist. Faster.
But you do it faster too.
Yeah, we do it faster, yeah. There's no intonation to worry about, so we just play.
So, Suzuki-san, primarily for string instruments, but when did this variant towards Suzuki piano method happen?
I don't know that I'm the right person to answer that question, but I do know in the 80s it was pretty popular. The one, I think, difficulty we had in the United States is in Japan you had all of this ear training, right? And people were learning to play so well, but they were also teaching reading in the schools. And so there were a lot of American students that followed the Suzuki program, religiously, but didn't necessarily have the backup of the reading. So I was lucky that my teacher decided to supplement the studies with some reading exercises, because when I did start, I was playing all by ear. And
that was, can you tell us where you grew up?
Sure. I grew up in the Midwest, much colder place than here. I grew up in Iowa. And my path was there, and then through high school, and then I went to the East Coast for 10 years and landed here kind of on a whim and couldn't be more thankful about it.
I asked Dawn and Anna last week what's beautiful about Tennessee and Georgia. From Iowa,
Say it.
I know that they raise a lot of corn, but most of the corn they raise is not for human consumption. It's for the cattle.
Yeah.
If I were to go to Iowa, and actually I have been to Hawaii, just driving from Illinois to the other side. And then I hear that the cops will nail you if you go 1 mile over the speed limit. But tell us something beautiful about Iowa.
That's a bit of a struggle when you think about landscape. We're full of cornfields and soybean fields and pig farms, and we're flat as can be. But if you go near the Mississippi River in the fall, it's kind of rolling hills there, and you get a little tree color. It's quite nice.
What part of Iowa were you from?
The cornfields.
The cornfields.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you
North Central Iowa.
North Central, so like Grinnell.
So I grew up in a town called Forest City, believe it or not, which is, there's some irony in that. But our claim to fame is where Winnebagos are made. So if anybody's done a kind of motorhome trip across the United States, you may have taken a Winnebago.
Yeah. You know, I will share that a few years ago. This is totally unrelated to the symphony or anything, but it is related to Winnebagos. My wife and I went to a wedding in outside of Denver, quite a ways outside of Denver, and there weren't a lot of housing options, and you could either pitch your tent or stay in a cabin, and so we rented an RV.
Right.
And I really got into that lifestyle, so it's something that I'd like to come back to in the future, but Winnebago made me thought to share that. So
you drove from Chicago to Denver?
No. We flew to Denver, rented it, and only drove 3 or 4
because
hours.
I drove from Denver to Toronto.
Oh.
We were hoping to make it in one stretch, but we ended up in East Lansing from Denver. So that's hence my beautiful story. But
About Iowa. Yeah.
So we encourage you to ask questions.
About Iowa.
Perhaps not about Iowa or Winnebagos, but in order to take part in the conversation, you can text the number on the bottom of your screen right here. And we will get those and we will answer those. And we have a quiz question which we'll get to. But before this question comes in, can I ask, what's the reach? What's your how many, like octave and a half? What's
So I teach a lot of specifically smaller Asian women, and so they often get a little jealous of it, I should say. So I reach a 10th easily and play 10ths. I can play 11ths if I need to, but I typically would rather move laterally and save my...
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So I got that one out of the way. I knew that one was coming. So, Iggy?
Was that a God-given height, or are you both your parents rather?
Well, by Midwest standards, I'm not actually that tall. I think when I was playing basketball, I was one of 3 or 4 that were all, we were all about 6'4". My dad was 6'2" at one point. He's a little shorter now. And my mom was 5'8", 5'7", something like that.
So you actually, I know that because we were talking about it. You were multi-talented when you grew up in school. My first question is, when you're talented at math, as you were, at sports and music, what made you kind of veer towards music?
Oh man, Iggy's done his research tonight. This is dangerous. No, I think music was always the passion. So I had, I was lucky enough to have some success, in a classroom or on the track or court or whatever. But I was always much more interested in music and eternally fascinated. I found myself always kind of wanting more. And at that time, I would, gregariously listen just to everything I could. Grab piano music, but grab symphonic music, grab opera, grab chamber music, anything I could just to kind of listen. And then when I got to the East Coast, it was an explosion of concerts that I could suddenly go to. I was in Baltimore, so I would hear their symphony and their opera, but then I would also drive to New York or Philly or wherever I could to hear all of these famous names I'd heard on Deutsche Grammophon and other places. So no, it was always kind of music driving me. There was a point when I started school, I was quite worried about what a career in music could look like. I think there's a lot of us that have maybe some potential, but it's hard to kind of conceive of where that's going to lead. But I realized that shortly after arrival that the only way I was going to succeed in music is if I fully dedicated myself to it. So I just jumped.
We want to get to that, but tell us about your accomplishments on the track field and also in math, please.
I don't know if this has been told in Hawaii here. I'm a 2-time state champion in the high hurdles. So I would run.
And a record that still holds in your school?
Yeah. I have, my mom informed me, I still have 4 records.
110-meter hurdles?
Yeah, 110 hurdles, 400-meter low hurdles, the 200 and the 400. So for 22 years they've held, and I keep hoping someone will break some of them because that means our track team is doing well again, but it hasn't happened as of yet. So.
Dave, any track field records?
I'm feeling woefully underprepared at Iggy's research. No, not great with the hurdles. At least not the track type.
Hurdles is like a little bit like piano playing. It's good technique.
Yeah, actually, that's why I liked it so much. Is I had a great coach who was detailed, and I could focus on the technique and not run as many laps around the track and get sick. So it was a pretty good deal.
So could I go back to what you were saying about being in New York and really dedicating yourself to music, and now as an educator, as a teacher, do you feel like that experience, how does that translate into what you tell your students or how you work with them? Is a career in music the only way forward for a lot of your students, or are you able to guide them different ways because of your experience?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the student. I think for an undergraduate student here, we try and keep our options pretty open, and we're just trying to improve on piano. Once we're at the graduate level, we're often preparing for a career in music, whether that's a performance type career for some of them or more a teaching geared career for others. It really depends. So let's say the most motivated to have a position like mine will try and go on for a doctoral degree. So I have a number of them doing doctoral auditions right now. But at the undergraduate level, sometimes they're supremely motivated to be on that piano-only track, and sometimes they're doing a double degree and kind of finding their niche as they go along.
I want to jump into some of the questions we're getting already. This is a very, I feel like I'm not sure I should ask this one. When you choose to listen to something, would you choose to listen to a solo piano or a solo violin?
But it's for business or pleasure, I guess it depends, right?
Yeah. I would say there's more pianists in my listening library than violinists, but there are certain nights when a violin calls.
And what's the repertoire that it's calling you with?
Very often music written for a violin after, let's say, 1860s, anything more modern. Like piano, I don't know. I'm really happy listening to a Beethoven concerto, Rachmaninoff concerto, anything. I kind of take the things that make me feel good these days rather than not always challenging myself.
So the two of you have collaborated quite frequently together, I understand. And can you talk about that relationship between pianist and violinist? How has it changed with different repertoire? There's these terms that collaborative accompanist, or just the word accompanist. Yes. Can you tell us why that's such an offensive term these days? I'm looking at Carlos in New York.
Is collaborative really offensive? Because I went to school at Indiana, and one of the most famous cello teacher there is Janos Starker. And so if the students would say, his cello students would say, next week I'll be I'll be playing with an accompanist, and Mr. Starker would get so furious. He said, please call them a pianist. But I didn't know that being a collaborative pianist was
collaborative pianist is okay.
That one's okay.
Accompanist, though, is the terms. Yeah.
But I mean, Dave brought up a very good point, and actually I had written down, you, as piano students, you play a lot of your time playing by yourself. And some pianists never get to play with another instrumentalist until very much later.
Yeah.
Tell us why it's so important to have a partnership early on.
Yeah. Well, let me go a couple different
Please.
things. So personally, for me, when I was growing up, at first it was all a kind of solo track, and then when we got into high school, believe it or not, I was saying I was from the countryside. The violinist I played with lived about an hour and a half away, and the cellist lived about 30 minutes away. So we would meet every other weekend just to play chamber music, Mendelssohn Trio or something. I find myself, especially in my even student years, I can go about 3 or 4 weeks by myself practicing in a practice room without musical interaction. And at that point, I start to go a little stir crazy, and it gets worse and worse. So I really, really crave that musical interaction with with the string player, with the singer. It doesn't really matter to me, but I really like the sound of other instruments with the piano too. I like it adds a whole new depth to it, and also it doesn't allow me to plan everything out in my own playing. I love the idea of on stage of having to adapt and make changes, and I really almost live for those moments. And so you don't know exactly what's going to happen, and you adapt and go.
Yeah, and I have to admit that sometimes we non-pianists have a term called piano rhythm. And so what we mean that is that sometimes we hear pianists play really beautiful Chopin ballad, nocturne, Beethoven sonatas, right?
Yep.
And then you put pianist with violinist and cellist together, and they go like this, and sometimes it doesn't always sync with our sense of rhythm. And I think we brought it up many times on this show about the pulse and about musicians having really different sense of rhythm, whether you're wind player, pianist, even jazz players. And do you feel like sometimes you practicing chamber music piece on your own, and then we put everything together, and it's kind of a different experience?
It changes completely sometimes. Yeah, and I really like that about it. I think what you're talking about, rhythm, is so true, and the other thing is color and sound, because you have one idea in your ear, and then suddenly I might collaborate with Iggy on a piece I've never heard before, especially something recently written for us, and wow, does my color palette and dynamic range just change completely based on what Iggy might be playing.
So you said you lived in Baltimore because you went to Peabody?
Yep.
Was that for your master's, or?
Peabody for my undergraduate. I read kind of this story recently, but I studied with Anne Shine, who is one of two students of Arthur Rubinstein. And she retired my junior year, and I thought my life was ending. And she, rather than trying to graduate early and go somewhere, she talked me into staying, and I met a teacher called Boris Slutsky, who really changed my playing and changed my life. I mean, Miss Shine, I think, was just the ultimate musical influence, but Mr. Slutsky gave me the small tweaks, the technical tools to really be successful.
And that's something I've talked to a number of musicians. They maybe just wanted to know about your experience. Is that sometimes you think, you're maybe by 15, 16, your technique is all set, and then you show up at either conservatory or university, and you find another teacher, and they'll start over. They'll start you over, and you have to redo your technique, and I didn't know that was common. I thought maybe, they do it sometimes because they feel like they have to, but it happens to a lot of young, aspiring musicians who may be really good at their technique. And my own teacher in Paris, when he was young, he won first prize of the Paganini International Violin Competition. But then he said later on he met Henrik Schering, and he overhauled his own technique. It's a bit like, I think, Tiger Woods won so many golf tournaments, and then later on we changed everything. So, is Dave, tell us, did you feel like you had to hit a reset button?
A couple of times, throughout my career. I think that there was a reset button. I also studied with teachers when I was young that were phenomenal at setting up left-hand technique. The Vamoses were known for really solidifying left-hand technique. And I never got past that, so I had no idea what to do with this hand. And then I had a teacher in my undergrad where we really focused on how to draw sound out of the viola. The difference between the violin and the viola, and this isn't a joke, is that the viola you have to pull the sound out of. A violin you can add pressure because it's a higher tension, and you can contradict me on this, but there's a certain amount of pressure you can apply that in the viola, because of the size and the shape and all those issues that we've talked about, you have to coax the sound out of the instrument a little bit. And so during my undergrad, I really got that going. And then it all came together, in my master's. It was like, oh, now we can talk about the music. And I think we've talked about that on previous episodes, is that, that's kind of how I developed. But then there'd be summer festivals, and like you'd focus on little pieces of technique that would change things. But I think
you mean with your summer teacher?
Yeah, with a different summer teacher. But I think that, and I'm curious the athletics aspect of it, and curious how that translated with music. I was a big golfer. Loved to play golf, and a good golf professional always, to me, took my swing and made adjustments to it to make me a better golfer. They didn't say start back at zero and hold the club this way, and just that wasn't the case. I'm curious. For me, that then translated into playing the viola. It was finding teachers who could change little things and improve upon the base, the foundation that I had. Was there any crossover like that with you with athletics into piano and music?
I would say more from music to athletics. And
Okay.
the coaches I really was attracted to were the types that would focus on the details and the technique.
Yeah.
There's, I think in middle school and high school sports, there's a lot of let's get pumped up and go hit something, sort of coaching. But but there's so much more, detail to almost every sport. And so, if you're focused on the technique, it really helped me, and that's definitely how my brain worked, having studied piano for so long.
Yeah. Interesting.
And then there's something very important. I want to get to it, but first of all, Dave, I think people are getting thirsty.
Oh. Well, we have a quiz question this evening that I'm going to toss over to Iggy here to ask, I believe. And again, this week our wine is sponsored by Hasser Wines here in downtown Chinatown, around the corner from the Hawai'i Theater Center. We have a beautiful Chianti that we're delivering to the quiz question winner, who lives on Oahu and is at least 21 years of age. And
ID?
We do ID.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we do. And we also have, once again, a lovely charcuterie platter from Terry at Hasser Wine. So thank you, Terry. Go support them this week. We could all use a drink, I think. And good to support our local partners here who are supporting us. So without further ado.
So I think maybe I'm going to toss that question to you, John.
Oh, okay. I guess there's some tie-in here with my position at UH, but there were, I would say probably in the last 35 or 40 years, five full-time faculty members before Dr. Thomas Yee and myself arrived as full-time piano faculty at UH Manoa. Can you name one of those former full-time piano faculty?
And there are five. And apologies to the lecturer who are part-time like myself. I'm a part-time, so apologies to Rosie and Bichuan and Katie and Wendy. But we're talking about one of the five full-time professors who were there before Dr. Korth and Dr. Yee. So I wanted to get to this very interesting subject. You were talking about technique and sports and music, but when you get to the very high level, it's mental. It's all in your head, and how to be able to focus on the pressure. And sports athletes, they say that when they feel in the zone, everything slows down, and they can see everything clearly. The basket is as huge as the ocean. But then you always see when you watch sports, right before a game, they get so pumped up, and is this all theatrics? Because I feel like if I had to be like that before a sports game, or even actually being on stage, like all pumped up and I would get distracted. That's why Jonathan is wearing his mask tonight. But as sports athlete, did your coach actually teach you to kind of stay focused and not be distracted, or did you learn that more with music? Actually?
Yeah, I think it really depended on the coach. I think the best coaches, yeah, that's true. In track specifically, you had to have your quick twitch muscles going. So that was always my preparation. It wasn't. It was more just to be able to jump when I hear a the gun or just kind of the quick muscle movement.
The reflex.
Yeah. So it was. I was like pumping myself up, but in a focused sort of way, rather than like the kind of rah-rah way you're talking about. But I certainly know plenty of athletes that was the way they had to do it.
I see.
Wrestlers and football players specifically.
And you were excellent at math, I understand.
I mean that's a little bit overrated, but yeah, I mean I guess I had some math acumen at one point in my life that's been lost completely.
But math and music go together, no?
I think there was something that made sense about math with piano, and I've certainly read a bunch of studies that say there's excellent development for math when you study piano at a young age, and I do know a fair number of pianists who have been successful with that, but not everyone at the same time.
Did you, Iggy, when you were in school, did you read the book The Inner Game of Music?
I think I might have read part of The Inner Game of Tennis.
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay, yeah. It was a sports psychologist who wrote on what is, one of the lonelier sports, tennis. You don't have a coach, you don't have a caddy. You're out there on your own unless you're Serena and you're yelling at your box or the ump. Sorry. But music is the same way. You're on the stage sometimes by yourself, and sometimes you're your own worst enemy. And yeah, it was. I too. I read The Inner Game of Golf first before I read The Inner Game. It's all the same. It's just a white ball instead of a yellow one. So
is it in a way a fight that you're having with yourself?
I think a little bit, and kind of learning how to, I think, accept that and you harness that. And I think that's a little bit of the LeBron James before a game that you witness. I personally would love to see the entire orchestra backstage just like fired up and like everyone run out to theme music, but
we're like, Moss on 3, 1, 2, 3, Moss.
I want to see this. I mean, you really need to try this.
Yeah.
Jonathan, you were talking about a lot of your students are from Asia, from China, and have small hands. You're very popular and successful, and you've been to China many, many times. Tell us about how you developed your partnership and got to travel so many times there.
Sure. So I really have Beach One Lee to thank for this. She's one of our piano lecturers. She made some of the important first introductions. And yeah, now I've been able to travel through multiple Asian countries, but I find in China right now for recruiting the type of school we are, there's just more people willing and wanting to study in the United States right now, and the numbers are just have exploded in China for student pianists. So I spend more time there than other Asian countries, but I'm kind of an equal opportunity traveler. I love to teach and I love to eat. So those two things go really, really well when you're doing, presenting master classes or talks or whatever. So.
And you've been very successful in recruiting students. I was lucky that you brought
yeah, we did a trip together.
Myself to China, and I see they see China has so many people and so many talented musicians and young musicians, and you have so many conservatories from the mainland and consortiums, and you have Juilliard School that has a firm foot on the mainland, but you've been able to recruit some musicians to UH, and that's quite commendable.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's all about finding a personal connection with the student, and typically you don't have a lot of time. It's a 30 or 45-minute sort of session, and then very very often in the sessions I find something I might be able to offer the student, and if they find that valuable, and especially if the teacher also agrees and finds that valuable, then they're willing to kind of trust UH and trust me with students. Yeah, we've been really quite lucky to have many exceptional students from across Asia and more recently, specifically China, come to UH, and some will stay for the undergraduate degree, but more often they come for the master's degree, and then head off to get a DMA before heading to colleges and universities back in China to teach.
And Dave, because I've listened to masterclass, I've taken masterclass, but I never thought that 40 minutes would make a difference one way or another. But Dave, tell us about your own experience taking masterclasses. Did you feel like some teachers really made an impression on you, even if it was only 40 minutes?
It's a really different style of teaching, I think, in my opinion.
Yep.
And a master class for those at home who have not, I think this is something that's relatively unique to our industry. Yep. It's a group lesson. It's help me here.
No, it is, and I think as someone who presents it, you've got a lot of choices to make, because normally studying music and being that vulnerable is a one-on-one thing, and I think it's a lot easier. So in front of a group, I think you try to make the student comfortable enough to feel like they're in a safe space in a small space, but at the same time, either you really focus on the student, and I think it's something accomplished there, or you focus on the broader audience that's kind of come to watch. I do find it a tricky balance, and more often we'll focus on the student, but that's at the detriment then to everyone else who came to hear the tall American professor who was giving a masterclass.
Yeah, it is a very vulnerable situation because you are performing, but you're in a lesson and you're there to get feedback. Yep. Rarely do you perform in a masterclass and they say, "Bravo."
I can say that's never happened to me. Never once have I performed and they said, "We have nothing to say."
You've done it. You've done it. Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, but it is a really good learning tool, and I think that what I always got more out of the masterclass, both ways. But I think sitting in the audience and learning from someone else's experience, I think that's where I really learned to critique other people's playing in a meaningful way, because you can always sit there and say, "Oh, well, that's out of tune," and leave it at that.
That's right.
But the master class is not about that. It's, you talk about what's intonation. Why is this in tune? What harmonies is the piano playing that you've never thought about because it's the first time you've played it with a pianist? Those sorts of conversations. And I think that that's really where a lot of my growth came from in master classes, was actually the, learning to teach, learning to critique.
And believe it or not, there are some studios that they're rare, but the late great Leon Fleischer was one of them, who I got to observe.
We taught at Peabody.
Frequently at Peabody, and occasionally play for. And he taught only in masterclass format, so he would have group lessons essentially. All six of you, or however big the group were there, and you had to perform in front of the group, which was a big step up in terms of your preparation, because you didn't want to embarrass yourself in front of your classmates. And then also you got the information from a broad range of pieces for that day. So it's a kind of impressive way to do it, but it's also terrifying for the students unless they're really professional level.
I remember a famous singer came to Hawaii and gave a master class, and one singer student performed their work, and I think the comment from the famous singer superstar said, "Don't go into music."
Oh.
But anyway, things like that happen, and for me, sometimes we get very, 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 very famous artists come, and I'm more in a situation where a lot of times I prepare my own students to play for those master classes, and I find them very helpful. And even if sometimes they can say the same things, it's good for the students to get the same comment through a different angle, maybe. There may be only a couple times when sometimes I see all the parents and they're so impressed by the master class and the famous teacher, and they ooh and ah at everything they say, and sometimes they may say, "Well, you play out of tune because you're not putting your finger in the right place," and the parents go, "Ah," I'm like, "Ah." So anyway, sorry, that was sort of nasty. I'm sorry. But,
inside the beltway.
Anyway, so you put in your resume that you enjoy fine dining, and that kind of surprised me because coming from Iowa. But now it makes sense, because you go to China, and in fact, on those trips to China, I've been able to share with you, they would treat you like an emperor and serve you 13 courses.
Oh my goodness.
12.
Yeah. I eat more than I've ever eaten on almost every trip to Asia. Yeah, I've started to be able to find ways to politely decline food, but it took a while.
There's fine dining in Iowa.
Oh, I'm sure there is. What would be, if I went to Iowa and I went to a restaurant, what would I order?
Without exaggeration, the Machine Shed is the place I would send you. And they have cornbread in barrels and sizes that are for 3 people on every plate, and it's really a good experience.
I have been to the Machine Shed, and it's for me, Rube's Steakhouse is another close second in Iowa. So you grill your own steak, Iggy.
Well, I make fun, but I remember when I was in Indiana, the Big Ten, and you had rivalries and basketball, and I don't know how well Iowa ever did compared to Indiana or Michigan or Michigan State.
Oh wow! No, we don't typically win, but this year I think we're ranked in the top 12 right now, so it's not a bad year.
I'm going to add a couple of these questions here that we're getting. I think this could go to you both, but what advice would you give to young musicians that don't have the same performance opportunities until the pandemic settles down?
Iggy, you want to answer that?
Well, there's a silver lining, and that is that if you cannot perform in front of people, you can still record yourself. And there's a lot you can learn from listening to yourself, just the tone quality, and just you'll discover things that you didn't know or you wouldn't be able to discover if you perform live. And so I think even the few times I've been myself, and I'm not young anymore, but I feel like there's another part of my brain or another part of my ear that's kind of become more sensitive to certain things, just listening to myself recording. Of course, if you just have a phone and the mic from the phone, that's not going to help very much. But if you're lucky to have maybe an external mic, simple external mic that's of decent quality, it's helpful. And it will help you when you come back to live performances.
Would you add anything to that, or?
Along those same lines, when the pandemic, like the first half of this pandemic, I was often having my students record their lesson piece and then send it to me, and I found they were doing it at such a higher level than they would have if they just came and played for me in a lesson, because they had to hear themselves before they sent it to me. So it really did make a difference. This pandemic has been a very strange thing for musicians, because I think a lot of us feed off this audience energy and of course the ability to perform. But in another breath, there's always part of me that says, man, I wish I had time to practice. I really just wish I had time to practice. And for the first time in at least 14 years for me, holy cow, I have time to practice and really focus. So I do think there's a time that in the near future, performances will return, and these young students will get to play again. But for now, as much as it's possible, and I know it's a kind of monotonous routine day after day after day, but focus on that repertoire. Focus on expanding your repertoire. Focus on the little details. Maybe your teacher will give you working on sound, working on a specific etude. I think there's all these different ways we can better ourselves, even though we have the frustration of not being able to kind of perform live for people. The other thing I would encourage people to do is just do little Zoom concerts for family and friends and whoever might want to listen. I think it's pretty popular and easy these days to play for a group of 5 or 10 people online, and I think a lot of people like that.
Yeah, that's great. Opportunities for young musicians.
Yes, and if your teacher is a member of HMTA, Hawaii Music Teachers Association, there are Zoom recitals, and you can sign up.
Absolutely.
And then, Jonathan, I have to thank you, because during the pandemic, I've actually been able to perform with you. One was thanks to Team Slaughter and Outreach, UH Manoa.
Yep.
And the other time was you and I flew to Maui and performed in the beautiful Not as beautiful as the Hawaii Theater Center, but also at the Maui Arts and Culture Center. And so those were nice performances. I wanted to talk about teaching. So you're both younger than me. I'm sort of on the bridge between the old school and sort of the new wave. Just like regular academic schools. My brother grew up, and then when he grew up in his school, high school, if the teacher was not happy about a test or something, the students would show their fingers, and the teacher would take the ruler and go,
Yikes.
right? So those were maybe the 70s in Europe. If you are music students, it's very possible that your teacher in Europe would kind of take the bow and go. So you're at the university level, of course, that's not acceptable. But did you ever experience that, and did you ever see that, and was there like a phase where there was a transition where it was not acceptable? I guess I'm getting to that point because for me sometimes it's easy to yell and say, do this! You're playing out of tune again. And so I don't really know the method of being diplomatic and soothing, but being able to give constructive criticism. Is that something you always had in you, being able to convey your message peacefully and convincingly? Or?
For the most part, not always, and my students will attest to that. But I really do try. I think my upbringing was slightly different because I had parents who didn't know anything about music, so I was lucky enough. They thought everything I kind of did was reasonable, and then I just had to get good on my own.
Well, I'm not talking about parents. That's a different story. That's a whole different story. We're not going to even go there, okay? I'm just talking about teachers.
Yeah, I don't know. I do find there's so many things to talk about in any given piece, especially as pianists. We are essentially attempting to be not the HSO, but a symphonic sort of sound, as we play. And so there's, I think, things to compliment, and I always do try and start with a compliment or two, and after that we dig into all the things we can improve on, and I try and make sure that people leave with some motivation, of course, to work, but more often that they don't know what they're doing yet, and they.
That's very important. Dave, what was it? Did you ever see tough teaching?
I had some stern teaching. There were always high expectations, but always very supportive in those high expectations.
Because you think of Juilliard, you don't necessarily think of very supportive teachers.
Yeah, you think of like Whiplash, the movie. Yeah. It's not. It wasn't like that for me. I had very incredibly nurturing teachers while I was there. Yeah.
I do remember some old school teachers. They weren't my direct teachers, but old school, like violin or other teachers at schools I've studied at, and those were scary lessons.
Yeah, it's always the violin.
I remember
chairs being thrown.
Yeah.
I remember some of my teachers were smoking, right? And so they would smoke so those are public establishment, public conservatory with taxpayers funded classes and pianos, and so you'd had my teacher, and so sometimes they'd be sitting by the piano, and they would put the cigarette butt on the edge of the keyboard, and so over the years you'd see the keyboard being burned a little bit because of the teachers putting their cigarette butt on the keyboard and teaching, and I had, I think, 3 main teachers, and my last one at Indiana was also a smoker, but was very, very elegant, Italian, in tweed jacket, and always, it'd be 100 degrees, in the summer at Indiana, I'd still be wearing his tweed jacket and very elegantly. Anyway, but then his wife didn't want him to smoke, so when he knew his wife was coming to check in the studio, he'd be like, psh, 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 psh. So, and then I'd still be playing, and I would pretend nothing ever happened. So that But that's not the only thing I remember from my teachers.
There was a lot of smoking faculty at Indiana University School of
There
Music.
was,
Yes, yeah.
Thankfully, this
guitar,
is
yeah.
kind of gone now. So.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sorry, I kind of degraded this whole.
It's okay.
whole
That's
session.
that's okay. I want you. You said that with your digital lessons, you were having them record.
Yeah.
And then were you playing it back and watching together with your students and giving commentary, feedback as together, or?
Now that's what a pro teacher would have done. Oh. Yeah. I mostly used it for myself because I could listen at a higher level.
Yeah.
Than if you're trying to do FaceTime, Zoom, or any
Sure.
of the other streaming
Yeah.
things. So that, I felt like I was better prepared to kind of. You can pick up things like rhythm online are quite easy, and there's other kind of basic elements of music, but things like sound and layering and texture are much harder when the quality's not great.
I want to come back to a few words you just used there, but I want to ask this question first because it relates to recording. To you both, curious about all of your opinions on recordings and their role in developing listening and the issue of imitation versus the benefits.
So coming in terms of, I'm a performer and I'm using the listening. Or?
I would say as a teacher, maybe from that perspective, and how much are you encouraging students to go out and listen to
a performance?
Yeah, listening to Milstein play Bach and trying to imitate that or to learn from that.
Ideally, I would like the students to try to put one stone at a time on their own, so trying to learn the piece on their own, even if it takes a lot longer. When they're in a performing shape, when they sort of know the structure, the foundation of the piece, then I encourage them to listen to different interpretations. I might have some, suggestions as far as who, for instance, if it's Bach, I'll suggest someone, or mostly because of tempo and style. But ideally, you don't want the whatever is there to listen to be a crutch. You want this to be a source of inspiration, further inspiration, but the foundation, the layers, I like to come from the student itself. Ideally.
Yeah. Before you answer, can I know, who do you recommend for Bach?
Curious. It's changed over the years, because when I grew up, it was the 70s, 80s, and so I think Henrik Schering was very, very popular. Milstein and Heifetz had done some, but I think it was more Schering and Grumiaux, Arthur Grumiaux, fantastic Belgian violinist. But it was more romantic, right? And then I think in the 80s, 90s, it sort of purified a little bit. But I think like Zehetmeier was a German violinist, and there's another German guy who are not like period performers. They're more like very romanticized, but still kind of more reverence towards the past. And then you have the real period performers, and whose name I think there's maybe a Dutch woman, or so those are good to get a really fresh perspective.
So all of the recordings of Bach.
Well, yeah, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, and then sometimes there are trends, because like a few years ago, everyone was playing everything at breakneck speed, and everyone was doing that. And I think now it's maybe settled down a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, because you're the real specialist with Renaissance and Baroque, and
my guilty pleasure is listening to Milstein play Bach. I mean, and I remember, being a teenager and having that double CD with him in the suit, very, poised. I still have that image in my mind, and that's when I was younger. I was trying to imitate that. I was someone who I was imitating what I was hearing on a recording, because I grew up in the Suzuki method. it was fairly simple for me to just do exactly what I was hearing. I never understood. It wasn't until later, when you understood form and structure, as you were talking about, that you really start to understand why those decisions were made. So it was kind of reverse learning, in my opinion. But nowadays, the Honor Bylsma recordings of the Bach cello suites, I mean, I think that those are as close to what Bach would have done. There's a wonderful young cellist, Paul Dwyer, who's recorded the Bach's suites that it's just phenomenal. Sound, texture, voicing, coloring in the Bach suites, not things we normally talk about in string playing, that I think show a diversity of Bach's music. But I do tend to go more towards the historical performance context, the Rachel Podger,
Right. No, Rachel.
Yeah.
So, Glenn Gould for Bach? Who do you recommend for you?
Speaking of guilty pleasures,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, I never. Well, there was always the caveat with Gould: do not imitate, but listen for inspiration. Yeah, and I think we have more recent performances, or even Rosalind Turek or some of our yesteryear pianists that are maybe better pianists to truly learn from. But Gould was he's exceptional.
Yeah.
I'll listen to those Goldberg variations anytime.
Which one? Because the slow one or the less slow one?
No, I like the slow one. I like the
second
80s.
version.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Going back to the original question before I took Iggy down the Bach path, listening to recordings as a teaching tool, what's your perspective on it? How do you encourage or discourage students from learning through?
Yeah, that is so tricky. My tendency isn't to encourage people to listen to historic performances, and so for me that means like the Richters of the world, Galels, pianists that have been dead for decades, but really do some exceptional things. And I, again, in an idealized world, exactly what Iggy was saying, learn it from the ground up and learn it your way. I'm very aware there's a huge listening library on YouTube, and that tube of view has been used over and over in my studio to help prep pieces. But
Sure.
I think if we can kind of approach a piece with kind of some at least basic understanding of style, and learn the notes and start to kind of conceive of the piece ourselves, it really does help for what we're going to do later in life when we don't have a teacher. That's my biggest goal.
When you were growing up and listening to recordings, was there a sound you were trying to imitate? Are there pianists that you, as a young performer, were gravitating towards?
I think at 15 or 16, it was anything bravura, just the excitement of it. But soon afterward, I kind of developed a real love of a romantic sound. So whether that's the Rubinstein we talked about, or Richter is probably my favorite pianist of the last century. So that Russian sound too.
Yeah.
So I'm not an expert in piano hearing and playing. So for people like myself, when we're hearing like a Beethoven piano sonatas, which can be sometimes intimidating,
Yep.
Just like sometimes listening to a string quartet can be intimidating for some.
Absolutely.
Let's say there's a slow movement by Beethoven in one of his sonatas. What should I be listening to, or how can I make the experience, not pleasurable, because it's already pleasurable, but sometimes, I don't know how to differentiate different interpretation of a slow movement. I don't know sometimes it just all sounds the same from different pianists.
Oh, wow, yeah, that's a big question. And I think even Beethoven, I think it went from like amazing composer and pianist to genius level stuff, but that genius level stuff is sometimes really, really hard to comprehend too, right? So I think even within Beethoven, there's some differences. Wow, as far as what to listen to, the things I immediately pick up on are whether this pianist is trying to be more high classical style, and so that's with sound and phrase. So you're going to notice like a clearer sort of sound, and you're going to notice a more direct approach when it comes to rhythm and rubato. Or someone on the other side who maybe says, no, I want to have more the romantic side, or the romantic take on Beethoven, where he maybe had a foot leaning toward the romantic period. And so you see pianists that will go, with a kind of really heavy, darker sound in Beethoven and be willing to use a lot more rubato, specifically in the slow movement. So those are the kind of the two things I start with. But often with Beethoven, if I can pick up on rhythm, motive, or melody, but the first two are often the driving force behind his sonatas, you've got a pretty good start.
Speaking of recordings, I think we need to do a real quick round robin of our off the beaten path because we're getting towards the end of our time. So Iggy, what do you have for us this week?
No relationship to anything except actually my sister-in-laws went to the Dole plantation with her daughter, and they took the choo-choo train, which reminded me of something of a piece that I enjoyed when I was younger, which is Arthur Honegger, Pacific 231, which is a symphonic poem about a train, and it's very interestingly written. There's no really accelerando written. It's all very mathematical, and it's a very difficult piece. Pacific 231 is, it's actually a steam. I don't know how to say that word in English. Locomotive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's very telling, and it's just. At first hearing, you may find it kind of almost violent, but for me, it just reminds me of my childhood. And the mean teachers. Jonathan.
Okay, so I actually labored over this a little bit because there's so many pieces I like to kind of introduce to people, but I thought, okay, we're in the home of the HSO right now, so I should choose a piano concerto. And I'd like you to listen to Bolcom's Piano Concerto.
William
Bolcom's Piano Concerto. Yeah, he composer born in 1938, American. So he's aged today, but he's known as a performer for his rags and also his kind of cabaret nights with his wife, who's a singer. And this piano concerto was written at the bicentennial of the U.S., 1976, and he takes just a myriad of U.S. musical idioms and U.S. musical tunes and just throws them all together. So it starts with like just a basically blues chord and intense, and then you start to hear kind of the blue notes from the orchestra. It was written as a kind of, he said it was the bitterest piece he's ever written. So it was kind of a reflection on what he saw happening in the U.S. And I thought there were some connections here. We're kind of coming out of our coronavirus pandemic, and there's a lot of other things we're kind of trying to solve in the country right now. So I thought it could be appropriate. But the last movement is where I think it really just kind of all comes together, because he was trying to be ironic when he wrote it, but I think in other ways it just sounds like a celebration of Americana. It's got like Yankee Doodle, and it's got taps and like a Sousa marches, and they're all just kind of thrown together and layered on top of each other, and it's just this potpourri of musical explosion. It's just fantastic. So I would highly recommend it.
I'm going to have to listen to that one myself this week. That sounds great. Well, mine comes from a conversation that was had on this stage after the show last week. Don Womack and Anna Womack and Iggy and I were sitting around finishing our glasses, and I like to challenge composers a little bit and make outlandish statements. And my outlandish statement to Don was that very little in music theory changed between the last quartet of Beethoven and the 6-string quartets of Bartók. That's a big stretch of time. There's a lot of important things, I would argue, that happened in there, Debussy, etc. But, from a Ravel, from a Shostakovich. Well, okay. But I think from I was coming at this from a very theoretical, theory-based harmony, the use of the string quartet form, etc. And I think it was about 11 o'clock at night, and got a wonderful text from Anna saying, "What about Berg Lyric Suite?" And so I went and listened to that alongside the quartets this week. It was, I think, Lyric Suite was 1921, and the string quartet started about 1909. And so it's a little bit after the first. But Berg Lyric Suite, string quartet,
right,
wonderful piece. And then it kind of took me down the rabbit hole of some of Berg's works for voice and orchestra, the four songs.
Very good choice. I'll have to check it out. Sorry, we have 1 minute. I did want you to bring up Honolulu Chamber Music Series. Fantastic presenters.
Sure.
You're the president. Tell us about HCMS very quickly, please.
Sure, Honolulu Chamber Music Series. So right now, we're on the 6th of our 8th online concert. So you can hear David Schifrin, who I believe was an HSO soloist recently, play chamber music with the other players from Lincoln Center on our website, honoluluchambermusicseries.org. We present 5 or 6 concerts a year at Orvis Auditorium. Matthias Gunna, I'm trying to think, Marc-Andre Hamelin, a number of famous quartets like, Tokyo and Takashi Quartet and others have come and played for our stage relatively recently.
Famous. St. Lawrence, Juilliard String Quartet.
But most relative for tonight is we also had the Iggy Jang Tango Extraordinaire. So, you get all types of concerts here, all types of famous musicians on our stage.
Yeah.
But we really do have a great time. We're an all-volunteer organization, and we love to hear great chamber music and do our best to bring it here.
That's wonderful. Looking forward to those performances. We need to share the winner. So can you fire off all 5 names without using your notes?
Yes, so we had Peter Coraggio, Ed Shipwright,
Good.
Tom Rosenkrantz,
Okay.
Ron Morgan,
Yep.
and Paul Lydon.
Lydon.
Yep.
Excellent. We did have a winner who named Shipwright, but told us to keep our wine. Thank you, Kathy, for the wine. But we had another winner just after that who named not 1 but 2, which is fitting because this will be her 2nd bottle of wine 2 weeks in a row. Thank you, Mari. Correct answers.
Well done, Mari.
So, thank you for playing. Thank you for all the questions and comments tonight. We really appreciate that. And some that we didn't get to, we'll follow up with in email this week. So we're 1 minute over. And so this is the time when I ask the most difficult question. What does the future of classical music and the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra look like?
Oh, wow. I got 2 guys looking at me who are much more involved in that than I am. Wow. I mean, I truly expect and hope that the symphony will be part of our life for many years to come. I will be interested to see when we can migrate back to in-person concerts if we keep some of these online elements. I think that's going to be one question for a lot of us presenters and artists. But I do see a strong future for the HSO, and to be frank, I think I really take pride and joy in the opportunities I have to play with them as well. So it's something that I do try and invest in as much as I can.
Absolutely. Well, go back and watch. I believe it was our October performance, the Carnival of Animals. Jonathan played on the animal named the pianist.
Yeah, the pianist, yeah.
Yes, a rarity at the zoo these days. But I just want to thank you for joining us, and thank you for everyone out there for tuning in live with us and throughout the week. And Iggy, thank you as always. This is, as you called it right before we got on the show, my happy hour. I appreciate the hour we spend together and to create community with our supporters here. So cheers to you, and thank you again for joining us, and thanks for the constant support keeping us going throughout all this. So mahalo. See you next week.
Life changed so fast.
During COVID, we've had a chance to think about what's really important in our lives.
The arts are an expression of what it's like to be human.
To feel, to help us make sense of our world. Does it mean anything if no one sees it?
Training and dedication are stronger than any virus.
We all need to express ourselves.
Keep doing the things that make you happy.
So when the lights come back up,
We'll all be ready.
For the last 24 years, your nonprofit Historic Hawaii Theater has helped millions of people explore and experience the wonder of music, theater, and culture. From school plays to Broadway shows, from the Brothers Kaz to the Beach Boys, we've transported you from Hawaii to the moon and back. Won't you become a member today and help preserve this last remaining historic show palace? Go to hawaiitheater.com. Become a member today. We can't do it without your support. Mahalo.